There appears to be growing concern among scientists as to the possibility of dangerous long-range side effects from the widespread use of DDT and other pesticides. Have you considered asking the Public Health Service to take a closer look at this?
Yes, and I know that they already are. I think particularly, of course, since Ms. Carson's book, but they are examining the matter.
As Time magazine puts it, Rachel Carson was a force of nature. Her 1962 exposé, titled Silent Spring, spurred a national dialogue calling for immediate reform of chemical policies. Boasting an exhaustive analysis of 6 chemicals, namely DDT, chlordane, heptachlor, dieldrin, aldrin, and endrin, Carson identifies a pattern of chemical negligence across the country and its detrimental effects on civilization. In effect, she discovers a terrifying reality. Humanity is inducing the biocide of all animal species, including humans. The truth in Carson's work amassed the support of then-President John F. Kennedy, which eventually led to dramatic change in chemical regulation. Her work is of constant reference in the 21st century, as her words still ring true today. We stand now where 2 roads diverge. But unlike the roads in Robert Frost's familiar poem, they are not equally fair. The road we have long been traveling is deceptively easy, a smooth superhighway on which we progress with great speed, but at its end lies disaster. The other fork of the road, one less traveled by, offers our last, our only chance to reach a destination that assures the preservation of the earth. Carson accuses the chemical industry and the U.S. government for being negligent on the ill effects of pesticides. Her sensational description of the easy road immediately alarmed millions of Americans. As a result, Carson highlighted an environmental catastrophe that would set the framework for a movement that exists to this day. The initial impact was enormous. As written by authors from the American Chemical Society, quote, Carson's book was not ignored. Her research and ideas became central testimony at 2 congressional hearings and a Presidential Science Advisory Committee report on pesticides in 1963 affirmed Carson's call for limits on pesticide use and further research into their health hazards. The years following the controversy over Silent Spring saw the establishment of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and the passing of numerous laws protecting the environment and human health, including a ban on domestic use of DDT in 1972 due to its widespread overuse and harmful impact on the environment. End quote. Rachel Carson was right. An advisory committee commissioned by John F. Kennedy himself had echoed the same words. Single-handedly, she had taken on the entire chemical industry. But Carson's magnum opus came even years later, long after her death in 1964, with the passing of the Toxic Substances Control Act of 1976. As described by authors from the Environment and Society portal, a website created by the Rachel Carson Center, quote, the Toxic Substances Control Act of 1976 was Silent Spring's greatest legal vindication. It directed the Environmental Protection Agency to protect the public from unreasonable risk of injury to health or the environment. Under its authority, the EPA acted to ban or severely restrict all 6 compounds indicated in Silent Spring: DDT, chlordane, heptachlor, dieldrin, aldrin, and endrin, and assumed responsibility for testing new chemicals. Towards the end of her book, Rachel Carson calls for a shift to alternative measures to combat the threats of mosquitoes, pests, and rodents in America. She specifically makes note of a growing movement to use the male sterilization technique in the quote seen here. In their article titled Sterile Insect Techniques for Controlling Mosquitoes, the Center for Disease Control describes sterile insect techniques as the following, quote, in the United States, sterile insect techniques, or SIT, for mosquito control is relatively new. SITs have been used in the United States and around the world since the 1950s to control insect pests. For example, a SIT was used to eradicate screwworm flies in North and Central America. End quote. SITs use a form of radiation to damage the reproductive organs of certain pests, rendering them incapable of mating. This slowly wipes out large numbers of unwanted species without damaging other animals, plants, and humans, which is what happens when the government agencies dust tons of DDT over forests through airplanes. Silent Spring wasn't just a brilliant attack on the abuses of the chemical industry, it was a proposal for a better vision of the world. A world where the environment didn't have to fear of the ignorance of mankind. Rachel Carson's immediate impact on society, government, and enterprise was astronomical, demonstrating how Silent Spring has come to be known as a world classic. There was once a town in the heart of America where all life seemed to live in harmony with its surroundings. So it had been from the days many years ago when the first settlers raised their houses, sank their wells, and built their barns. Then a strange blight crept over the area and everything began to change. There had been several sudden and unexplained deaths, not only among adults but even among children, who would be stricken suddenly while at play and die within a few hours. There was a strange stillness. The birds, for example, where had they gone? This town does not actually exist, but it might easily have 1,000 counterparts in America or elsewhere in the world. Carson opened Silent Spring with her famous Fable for Tomorrow. This chapter depicts a flourishing town that is destroyed by the effects of chemical and pesticide use. Both humans and wild animals are injured at best and totally wiped out at worst. Here Carson displays her greatest fear, a world consumed by the total neglect of chemical producers and the U.S. government. Obviously, chemical conglomerates feared for their industrial lives as Rachel Carson accused them of absolute malfeasance. As Madeline MacDonald states in her article titled Silent Spring in the Modern Environmental Movement, quote, large corporations did not want to see their steady flow of profit cut off by the banning of pesticides, and Carson's peers, mainly male biologists, criticized her credentials simply because she was a woman, end quote. Misogynistic corporate spokesmen went as far as mocking her own material. For instance, Lisa Griswold, editor of the New York Times, cites a brutal example of taunting by Carson's enemies in her article titled How Silent Spring Ignited the Environmental Movement. Quote, in a move worth of citizens united, the chemical industry undertook an expensive negative PR campaign which included circulating The Desolate Year, a parody of A Fable for Tomorrow, that mocked its woeful tone. The parody, which was sent out to newspapers across the country, along with a 5-page fact sheet, argued that without pesticides, America would be overrun by insects and Americans would not be able to grow enough food to survive, end quote. The negative response by corporate America was akin to a witch hunt. Carson was bombarded with scores of claims against her quote-unquote unruly and treasonous writings, and when America was entering the early stages of the Red Peril, where any criticism of the proceedings of American life was proof of a communist agenda, it seemed that Carson was in the wrong place at the wrong time. But it's clear that these antagonists didn't see Carson's work as untrue. In reality, they knew that Carson was right. Other intelligent allies to Carson, namely JFK, also caught on, which is why Silent Spring posed such a dramatic success in government. Seen here is a news bulletin detailing the response of a Silent Spring critic. In it, the author, Frederick Sperling of Howard University, cites the presence of quote-unquote misstatements, half-truths, and misinterpretations as the basis for him rejecting Silent Spring's thesis. While it may be the case that some of her statements lack citation, Carson spoke of a fast-closing reality of capitalistic negligence. Nearly all of her work was heavily researched, and her results were reflected by the Presidential Science Advisory Committee. It's evident that Carson was a victim of misogyny and corporate greed. In the modern day, Rachel Carson is a figurehead for the environment, conservation, and protection movement. Scientists today echo the same words that she spoke many years ago. Only now do we see that Carson's fable for tomorrow has largely come true. Most of Carson's achievements and praise came posthumously, such as the passing of the Toxic Substances Control Act and growth of the environmental conservation movement. But Silent Spring has seen new recognition in the 21st century, with the growing concern of pollution, climate change, and natural resource scarcity. As stated by Nicholas Gilmore in his article titled, The Deafening Criticism Against Silent Spring, quote, Carson's book is neither a hysterical call for Stone Age living, nor an emotionally spun tale of the apocalypse. Silent Spring is a plea for more time, research,
and deliberation regarding decisions we make for our own environment and ourselves. As the last 55 years have unfolded, we've seen the negative human impact on biodiversity worldwide. Plastic fibers turning up in over 80% of global water supplies, and an annual dead zone the size of New Jersey in the Gulf of Mexico, where a regular influx of field runoff creates a spot where fish cannot survive. The irony, though certainly not comedic, is that our own harm stems from the tireless efforts of survival, short-sighted as they may be." End quote. The looming issue of pollution, greenhouse gases, global warming, and disease are all on the forefront of current environmental concern. As authors from the organization Earth Day add in their article titled, "Why Silent Spring Still Matters," quote, 99% of scientists agree that climate change is happening, and that humans are at least exacerbating the issue if not causing it. Researchers have specifically connected our releasing of greenhouse gases, including carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide, to rising temperatures and an increase in environmental health problems. The melting of the poles, rising sea levels, and increased pulmonary diseases and cancers in humans are consequences of our actions." End quote. Silent Spring, now more than ever, is ammunition for the environmentalist movement. The laws and regulations that Rachel Carson helped pass are still in use today, but it's true that the chemical abuses live on. While the use of the 6 chemicals stated in Silent Spring is banned in America, chemical conglomerates are more than happy to switch to different, nearly as deadly pesticides to sell to the public. According to GRIST, a nonprofit newsroom, a USD report cited a jump in pesticide use between 1964 and 1982 by a factor of 3. A 2002 study indicated pesticide use at double that seen in 1964. Silent Spring's job still isn't complete. As history shows, Rachel Carson's accusations, accounts, and affirmations were generally true. The criticism that she received after Silent Spring's publication were largely unwarranted and misogynistic, as Carson's findings were reflected by an investigation by JFK. Her solo confrontation of American industry is an honorable example of the power of the people, especially women. In the modern day, Silent Spring is fuel for an even greater environmentalist movement. The book's legacy of governmental change, corporate criticism, and modern-day praise all support Silent Spring's status as a world classic.